The nation's capital is still arguing this weekend about that House Republican memo accusing the feds of abusing their authority to surveil a former Trump campaign advisor and suggesting there's politics at the center of the Russia investigation. We begin this hour with two members of the House Intelligence Committee. From San Francisco, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, and from Salt Lake City, Republican Chris Stewart. Gentlemen, now that we've seen the memo, the big question is, where does this leave the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation? Here's a tweet that the president put out this weekend. The memo totally vindicates Trump in probe, but the Russian witch hunt goes on and on. There was no collusion and there was no obstruction, the word now used because after 1 year of looking endlessly and finding nothing, collusion is dead. This is an American disgrace. Congressman Stewart, does the GOP memo vindicate the president? Does it end the need for the special prosecutor's investigation?
No, it doesn't end that need at all. I think it would be a mistake for anyone to suggest that the special counsel shouldn't complete his work. I support his work. I want him to finish it. I hope he finishes it as quickly as possible. This memo has, frankly, nothing at all to do with the special counsel. It was one of the criticisms of people last week and before that who had never seen the memo, who said, you know, this is to impugn the integrity and the work of the special counsel. As you know now, Chris, has nothing at all to do with that. They're very separate. I hope the special counsel will complete his work and report to the American people.
So what do you think the president is up to when he puts out a tweet saying that this memo vindicates him and obviates the need for any investigation?
Yeah, I think a couple things. And, you know, if I could take 30 seconds to review something that you said. For more than a year, we had collusion, conspiracy. You know, people were accused of treason. And no one is making that accusation anymore, at least no one serious. Even Dianne Feinstein has said there's no evidence of collusion. And I think that's the point the president is making. The essence of this memo is something quite different. And again, Chris, it's as you said, Hillary Clinton and the DNC hired Fusion GPS, who then hired, ironically, a foreign agent to create this dossier that we know is just political garbage. It's no more credible than a $2 novel. And the FBI used that dossier to survey a private U.S. citizen who had no accusations against him except for he had associations with the Trump campaign. It's an absolute abuse of power, and we just want the American people to know that.
All right, we're going to get into the memo in a minute. I want to talk and turn to Congressman Swalwell about the state of the investigation. Congressman, on Friday, the president was asked about Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who signed one of the request applications for this FISA warrant, and also is the only person who can either fire or limit the investigation by Robert Mueller. Here was the president.
You figure that one out.
Congressman Swalwell, is this memo an excuse to shut down the Mueller investigation?
It does appear that way, Chris, and good morning to my colleague, Chris Stewart. We believe that the memo that the Republicans put out shows not a single abuse, but a willingness to risk our republic to protect the president. And so I hope that Mr. Stewart is sincere when we go back to Washington this week, that he would do all he could to protect Bob Mueller and Mr. Rosenstein and support the bipartisan legislation that's out there that would do that. And also that we would support releasing the Democratic memo that puts into context, point by point, the seriousness of this investigation, as well as new unseen evidence that bolsters the FBI's credibility.
I promise I'm going to get to the memo and the whole controversy about FISA in a moment, but here's the question. Here's the issue I don't understand, Congressman Stewart. The House Intelligence Committee is in the midst of a broad investigation of unprecedented Russian interference in an American election in 2016, and yet you decide in the midst of that investigation to write a memo on this one particular point, which is what happened or didn't happen in the FISA court. Are House Republicans more concerned about protecting us from the Russians or protecting us from the FBI?
Well, a little bit of both now, actually, and that's not what we expected when we started this investigation. Chris, just a few months before the election, I was in Moscow, and I came home and talked to the media and said, they're going to mess with our elections. There's just no question that that was their intention, and there's no question that they did. And that's the impetus for this, for the House investigation. We want to look at how they messed, how they interfered, and hopefully preclude that from happening in the future. But as a result of that, we became aware of this abuse by the FBI and Department of Justice officials. And we just felt like this was so important. It's kind of separate from the Russian investigation, but it's so important that we advise the American people of that. And that's why we wanted to release this memo, get this information out there as quickly as possible. We'll continue the investigation on both sides. But again, this was a bit of a pause for us to say, this is meaningful information the American people deserve to know.
Do you buy that, Congressman Swalwell?
Well, no, I don't, because I have seen all of the evidence. I've sat in for almost every single second that a witness has testified. Now, I wish my Republican colleagues would do the same. 4 public transcripts have been released, and Mr. Stewart was either not present or didn't ask a single question during that. And that is
well, all right. That's kind
Mr.
of inside baseball. Let's get to the issue.
Sure, but the issue here is that there's not a willingness to look at the evidence. They assert that there's no collusion, but there's no interest or willingness to understand the evidence in this case. And so the evidence that we've seen with the limited subpoena power we have is a deep willingness that existed on the Trump campaign and the Trump family, on the Trump businesses, to work with the Russians and to receive information on Hillary Clinton. And we got to do something about it to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Chris, I have to respond to that if I could. Look, my friend Mr. Swalwell, if you want to convince people, go convince your own Democratic allies. Go convince Dianne Feinstein. Go convince General Clapper and many others. They have said there's no evidence of collusion. It's not just the Republicans who are saying that.
But Congressman Stewart, I want to put up several things, a full screen, because, and let's put it up on the screen right now, because some of the events have nothing to do with the Carter Page warrant, which again is why I wonder why you decided to focus just on that. George Papadopoulos being told by Russians months before that they had dirt on Hillary Clinton, the Trump Tower meeting between top campaign aides and a Russian lawyer, General Michael Flynn lying about his meeting with the Russian ambassador. You suggested at the beginning of this interview that you saw no evidence of collusion and no evidence of obstruction of justice, but you're focusing, I'm not saying it's not legitimate, we're going to talk about it, I promise, after you answer this question, but you're focusing on what happened in the FISA court with regard to Carter Page.
Yeah, because the American people didn't know about this. You knew about George Papadopoulos. You knew about General Flynn. All of that had been already reported. This had not been reported. And we felt like, once again, the American people wanted to know. And by the way, those things that you've talked about and the work of the special counsel, which, let me restate, I support and want him to continue, but none of that, virtually none of that, indicates any collusion on behalf of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. There just isn't anything. You've got some financial irregularities that happened years before the election. You've got some people in a process crime, as they call it, where they maybe weren't honest with the FBI. But no one has said or shown evidence of collusion between Trump officials and any Russian agents. There just simply isn't any.
Well, let's talk about the memo and its central allegation, which was that the FBI misled the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, to get a warrant on to surveil Carter Page without revealing the fact that this was political oppo research, the dossier. Here was the House Intel chairman, Devin Nunes.
I think the American people understand that the FBI should not go to secret courts using information that was paid for by the Democrats to open up investigations and get warrants on people of the other political party. That's the type of stuff that happens in banana republics.
Congressman Swalwell, doesn't that concern you at all that they went to get this warrant, and at least part of it, according to some reports, the lead item in the application was the Russia dossier, and as we all know, that was paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign?
Chris, there was a barrage of evidence that they presented to the court, including a disclosure that the Steele dossier had a political motivation. But it also included that George Papadopoulos had been contacted about receiving Russian dirt. He was on the same foreign policy team as Carter Page. Carter Page also, since 2013, had been suspected of being a Russian foreign agent. And we just learned today, breaking news before I came on the set, that Carter Page sent a letter in 2013 saying that he had been doing work for the Kremlin. They had all the right in the world to be concerned about these individuals.
I want to focus on one sentence in the memo, gentlemen. Deputy Director McCabe testified before the committee in December 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought from FISC, that's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, without the Steele dossier. Congressman Stewart, I notice that that's not in quotes. Did Deputy Director McCabe actually say that?
That may not have been his exact words, but I assure you, I was there, I was part of the questioning. I promise you that the intent of his answers was that we would not have gone forward were it not for this dossier. There was two basic pieces of evidence, the dossier and then, ironically, a Yahoo News report that was based on what? The dossier. And the author of that news report yesterday was shocked. He said, I couldn't believe they would use my news reporting as evidence before the FISA court when it was clearly based on the dossier. The information was fed to him by Fusion GPS and by Christopher Steele. That was the evidence. That was the bulk of the evidence for justifying this dossier. And they knew it was weak. That's why they didn't want to be honest with the FISA court and reveal to them that, oh, by the way, this was written by the Democrats. This was paid for by the Democrats. And, you know, that's one of the things that we're most concerned about.
Well, let me bring in, because we're beginning to run out of time. Let me bring in Congressman Swalwell. Why not? It does seem to show bad faith. Why wouldn't the FBI include in its application the fact that the dossier had been bought and paid for by the Democrats?
Well, as to Andy McCabe, that is not what he said. They have the transcript. I don't understand why they wouldn't quote from the transcript. And they did disclose that it was a politically motivated source. That's what the judge needed to know. And again, I think this is just an effort to torch the credibility of the FBI. So
did they put in the fact that it was bought and paid for by the Clinton campaign and the DNC?
You know what they did, Chris? They masked the names of most of the individuals. And last year, the accusation against the FBI was that they were unmasking names. So when they do the right thing and mask the name and just say there's a political bias, you're saying that that's wrong. And when they don't do that, you're saying that's wrong. You can't have it both ways. But in other words,
when they unmask, it's Republicans, but when they mask, it's Democrats?
That's what's being alleged here by my House Republican colleagues.
Chris, look, two things on this that are very, very important. If I were this FISA judge, I would be furious that this information was withheld from me. It clearly is relevant. It clearly is important. And the second thing is, we've been questioned about we're tearing down the integrity of the FBI. I'm a former military officer. I understand the necessity to protect your troops, but that's not what's going on here. I've been contacted by FBI agents in the last few days saying, thank you for doing this. We recognize that you're trying to hold us accountable. They have enormous power, enormous authority. With that must come enormous accountability. That's all we're trying to do here, is to hold certain individuals accountable if they abuse that power.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Congressman Stewart, Congressman Swalwell.
My pleasure.
Thank you both. Thanks for your time. And, of course, we'll stay on top of where your committee goes next.